frustrated.
Yes.
When I got the call, I did the first thing that I knew to do. I called the police.
Yes.
And I said, you know, there's a child that's missing. What are you doing? Who's assigned to it? And basically the response that I got was, she's a runaway. And I asked the question then, how can you tell she's a runaway when you haven't done an investigation? The other thing is, if you automatically assume that a child is a runaway,
Yes.
shouldn't you still be looking for them?
Exactly.
I mean, our children are just not throwaway, items.
The problem is, so many kids run away. And if you went searching for every kid who runs away, you use up your manpower.
In the process of us knocking on doors looking for Amber, we kept finding out about other children that were missing from the same neighborhood.
Yeah.
One father said, well, my son's been missing for 2 weeks. Another young man said, well, my cousin's been gone. By the time we finished interviewing family members and neighborhood people, we were told that there was at least 100 children in Clayton County that were missing at that time.
Yeah.
3 of the families told us that the police told them they couldn't do anything for 48 hours.
Exactly.
Absolutely is not true. If it's an adult, that may be the case. But if it is a child, there is no 48-hour waiting period.
You're right.
But George is not. You don't have to wait 48 hours. If your daughter's at home when you go to bed at 10 o'clock at night and you wake up at 7 o'clock the next morning and she's gone, you can call the police department and make that report.
So we started searching that night.
Yes.
And like I said, Sheriff Hill sent his Cobra unit out to help us search. But the police never did search. We also were very distressed to learn that the police, even at 72 hours out, had not posted photographs of the children. Matter of fact, they had not requested photographs of the children.
The parents of some of the murdered and missing children came to me and asked me if I would get involved because they had a lot of faith in me. I challenged the chief in person at that point. Why don't you just set up a task force? And he went back out with the commissioner, Lee Brown, and they set up the task force for missing and murdered children.
We also found in our investigation that several of the children were missing from the same corner, Battle Creek and Terra Boulevard.
Yeah.
So we staked out the corner. And so eventually we did find Amber. We found the other young man that we were looking for at that time. We found about 3. I mean, we physically found them.
Your own. If nobody knows the child is missing, then who is looking for them?
If we had not put these children on that missing children's list,
Yes.
and sent their photographs and their information, they would not be on there.
Exactly.
It should be mandatory that within X amount of hours, the local law enforcement does that. I think a lot of people assume that these are already in place, and they are not.
Exactly.
When we take missing persons reports, we like to have current photos so that you know what this person looks like, not a school picture. That way that'll assist the police department and other people, good Samaritans, who say, hey, that face looks familiar, let me call the police department. Maybe they can get an officer out here to see if it's the missing person or not. Basically, if you have contact with a bunch of teens or anything to that effect, or where you might know somebody that's missing and you know their friends, knowing their friends' help, where they hang out at, just teenage spots. Like I know here in Conyers, Carmike Cinema is definitely the teenager hangout spot. Definitely, if you ever think you see somebody, don't hesitate to call the police. Even if it's not them, if you're only 30% sure it's them, I'd rather you call the police out and we come and check and it not be them than it to have been a missing person.
In the course of us doing our work looking for children, we found out about 2 or 3 women that were also missing for long periods of time. One of the hardest cases we've had was a Caucasian gentleman that called for help and came to meet with us, whose daughter had been missing for at least 18 months before there was ever an investigator assigned. In one particular case, the young lady was actually found in Alabama, but there were never any charges pressed against the people that took her.
Exactly.
And one of the officers said to me, well, what would we charge him with?
The Amber Alert was put into effect as a result of a missing child. And it's my understanding that that alert is supposed to, I guess now, be in effect anytime a child comes up missing, or reported. That is not true.
No. The only time an Amber Alert can be issued is if you know for a fact or have reasonable certainty that the child was abducted.
Okay.
And so if the child just is missing, you don't have that. If little Johnny was seen being taken from the school by somebody in a black suburban, then that qualifies as an Amber Alert. If little Johnny just didn't come home from school and you don't know where he was last, that does not qualify for Amber Alert.
How do you feel about the new Amber Alert?
It's rather restrictive, but I think it's a great thing. If you move within 3 hours, you'll probably have to be successful.
Right.
As if you notice on the Amber Alert thing, a lot of kids have been found within 3 hours.
When you begin to tell the story of the child sexual exploitation and child prostitution, you have to start in the clubs, many of them on Metropolitan Parkway, or used to be. Because some people will argue that prostitution is a transaction between an adult male and an adult woman, and nobody really is hurt other than those two. There was an article done in Atlanta Journal-Constitution that basically chronicled the sex industry. And what we found out that clubs like Club Nicky's, the former Club Nicky's, other clubs that were on this strip and others throughout the city actually made more revenue than the Atlanta Hawks, the Atlanta Braves, and the Atlanta Falcons combined. I mean, prostitution and clubs like this run hand in hand.
I met this guy who told me I was good at dancing. Have I ever thought about entertainment?
But you were 16 at the time when he met you. How did he get you to change from this hip-hop dancing into stripping?
He just said that I can make money off what I do. I just have to change it up a little bit.
But one of the parts of the pieces of education for the public is that the bad person isn't necessarily a pimp. It's sometimes the recruiter is a female. Sometimes that person is a peer, maybe that's close to the same age, because they've been trained and they can spot.
Right.
They can spot the victim.
Come to find out, I used to actually hang with his daughter, and she was also a dancer.
And you were comfortable with doing that at the time?
At first I wasn't, but after the money started rolling in, you get adapt to it. You adapt to your environment, and it's good.
On average, how much money would the girls make a day or a night?
A day, on a good night, you might make about $500 to $600.
Many of these girls would get permits based on very well put together false IDs, which said they had to be at least 18 to dance.
You met other young girls who were doing the same thing?
Yes.
And did anybody ever ask you as far as like your age?
You could get ID at the time. People really didn't ask questions, like if you brought their club money, basically you got in.
All they would do is go West End Mall or some of these other places, get a fake ID to say they're 18. The club wasn't looking to necessarily enforce that. All they want to do is be able to show the police department every girl in here is of age. But we knew she wasn't because her mother was actively looking for her. So much so, the mother used to come to the club herself in disguise to try to find the girl. One girl in particular, once we began to search for her more aggressively, we knew she had been here, and one of the guys connected to the club put her on the bus and sent her off to Las Vegas.
You will always have a constant supply, as you very well know,
Yes.
of young girls who are helpless and vulnerable,
Yes.
as long as men are going to buy sex.
Yeah, and that's why you find them wanting them younger and younger, because what the Johns are saying is, I would rather take a chance with a girl who's 12 or 13 because I know she hadn't been out here. What we were beginning to hear, many of these girls was presenting in juvenile court HIV positive.
When you turned 17, how did you transition from just doing parties to actual going to the club?
Meeting other females at the parties, older women that I saw pushing Jags and Benz.
Nude dancing is a protected form of free speech, constitutionally protected. So you cannot come in and just take somebody's livelihood without having due cause. And what happened in these clubs was they presented you calls every week because somebody was getting shot, cut, stabbed, maimed. These young girls come from decent families. They come from working class families. They come from rich families. So it's not just a thing that you can say these were some poor kids with a broken home. That ain't the case. In some instances, I've counseled with parents where both parents were at home, working good jobs, making good money, living in great neighborhoods, and the girl is still out in the street.
Well, I got started by, I used to always love dancing. Drill team, I was involved in church functions, but I always wanted to be in front of people dancing.
I think what we began to see in the early 90s was that the game had changed. You never saw a pimp riding up and down the street anymore. And it went from a girl walking the street, you hardly ever see a girl walking the street now. What you do see is chat rooms. You'll see them meeting at Greenbrier, and the girls tell us all the time they down at 5 Points. And many of these girls are using both internet, but the more pervasive one is the telephone chat line. What they begin to do was put a young girl in a hotel room. You would call a number. John, who was trying to get with the girl, would meet somebody and pay them at another location. And once you paid him, he would then tell you go to the inn over on Old National.
Now, what made you get out of it?
The treatment. You don't get treated like a lady. Once you in the club, you get treated like trash. If you don't do what they want you to do, some people will try to actually rape you.
Once a child get in that, the parent don't have the pull to bring them back. So that child comes home, runs away, comes home, because that pimp knows how to play that particular girl. Even though in her heart she want to do right, but she'll keep running, come home, do all right for a little while, take off again. So it's a vicious cycle that destroys the entire family. And when you see some of these girls, many of the mamas don't even know them.
Right.
They cut their hair, they dye their hair, they put them on jewelry. They do everything imaginable to make these girls appear as if they're grown ladies.
What is the cause, or what was it that caused the mayor to decide to stand up for this devastating problem?
I think that she was probably personally motivated to be involved and stand for the children who were being molested and trafficked and abused. But I know that she was also very open to the idea when I came to her more than 2.5 years ago to ask if I could continue the work that I had started at the Atlanta Women's Foundation to develop strategies and solutions to why child prostitution was at such an epidemic proportions here in Atlanta. So I thought that after I left the Women's Foundation, working in the office of the mayor would be an excellent platform with which to take this issue to a whole new level. The Dear John campaign is a public education campaign to raise the awareness and the social consciousness of the fact that there is a problem of the commercial sexual exploitation of children here in Atlanta. I went to a public relations firm. They assigned the vice president to this account, and we worked over months to develop the campaign. And the mayor and her communications staff were willing to go along with it.
But is
So we
not
launched
the
it in
purpose
November.
supposed to be to apprehend the men that are...
No.
No? Okay.
Now, what's different about the Dear John campaign from other cities that have also done campaigns to end child prostitution is that ours is very market-driven.
My role was, as I represented this district on Atlanta City Council, one of the first things I wanted to do was break the back of prostitution. We started taking the cards of the John and holding them as evidence in the case. Had the Johns do mandatory jail time. And what happened was, after the Johns began to get, the Johns got jail time, got their cars taken, that slowed it down.
The previous organization early on in 2002, I believe, did a meeting at Georgia State with about 100 people on human trafficking and sexual exploitation of our children in Atlanta. That's when the laws were changed. Our organization helped change the law of pimping of minors from misdemeanor to a felony.
And one of the most notorious pimps in Atlanta was Sir Charles Pipkin, known internationally, but he's sitting in federal prison for 40 years for exploiting a child who used to dance right here in this club. What we also learned was the liquor license was what was fueling what happened here. So we began to go after the liquor license based on their failure to maintain these premises and keep a safe place. But when both of these establishments lost their liquor license, they were closed down within 2 or 3 months.
Most people actually don't realize that human trafficking is the second largest crime in the world. Right now, I think it's estimated that between 600 to 800,000 people are trafficked each year globally. And then specifically in the U.S., it's between 14,500 to 17,500 people. Atlanta is actually seen as the 5th largest city in the nation to be receiving victims of trafficking. A lot of times we see labor trafficking, like migrant farm work.
So I think the city kind of thought it was gone, but it's not.
Exactly.
Atlanta is now a hub for sexual exploitation of our underage children.
If you go up and down Clayton County, for instance, you'll see a lot of massage parlors. You know, there's a lot of people need massages, but most of these are fronts for prostitution, and you'll find a lot of Oriental young ladies, many of them are underage. We have one on Metropolitan that seems to always know how to operate just within the law, called harems. They always were able to, you know, skirt the law as we would send people in undercover, we would do everything we could, but they kind of understand how the game is run as well.
Our goal is to train those in the state of Georgia of how to recognize a victim of trafficking.
Human trafficking is a very serious issue.
Yes.
And it not only involves sexual exploitation, it also may involve forced labor. They're kept in those situations because they are being threatened with physical violence, that their families may be threatened, or particularly if they are in the country as illegal persons,
Yes.
their freedom is threatened.
Some of the arrests that were made in this special they showed were professional couples who had had a forced slave housekeeper for 8 years.
Yes.
There are a lot of rings in this community, in the metro Atlanta area, and I'm learning about more and more that are dealing with all kinds of bodies for hire.
Yes.
And they may not always be sexual.
Exactly, and in other countries it's called human trafficking because what you're finding is it is happening to young boys in some parts of the world as much as it is happening to young girls.
Anyone can become a victim of human trafficking. I've gotten plenty of calls on the hotline where it's been a male calling.
Male prostitutes on the Midtown, in the Midtown area, it has long been known that that's where they operate. And it's almost like they operate with full knowledge of everybody, full knowledge of the police. Everybody know that they're there, and nothing has been done really to try to abate that.
We don't really have a mechanism in place to, like you got a sexual predators list for people that are identified as pedophiles and predators.
Exactly.
Well, there's not a list to put the traffickers on.
Right.
What happens after you find the children? One change that I proposed specifically was to establish in Clayton County, the Clayton County Bureau of Missing Children. Because right now there is no central way to track the children.
Exactly.
There's no central way to know who's been reported missing. There's no central way to know who's actually looking for those children or where the last sighting was. But again, you know, you have to be honest with yourself. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Part of it is because it's a very difficult problem to solve.
Right.
And so when people feel that they don't know what to do with something, they sometimes tend to just look the other way. Well, the biggest issue is that many people were in denial in our county that we were experiencing this problem at all.
Exactly.
So much focus has been placed on activity in Atlanta. Our community in DeKalb seemed to feel that we were isolated. Aside from and in addition to the lack of understanding of what's going on, we have few resources. Once we identify children, that was one of the things that was frustrating for me when I was on the bench. Once the child was identified, what to do?
A lot of times, if you would take the time to sit down and talk to the child, you would find out that what they're running away from or trying to run to may be better than what they're running away from.
Now there are some cases where mothers do things that put their children in jeopardy.
And there are some situations where they don't need to be sent back home.
Exactly.
And, you know, what do we have in place to deal with that?
If I find a runaway juvenile and they tell me that they've been beaten at home and, you know, that's why they ran away, then of course the detectives are going to do a higher investigation on it and even get DFACs involved.
And if it were a young lady that were in front of me that had been away from home for a while, and once I started talking to her and figured that discovered that she had been on the street and she had been sexually exploited. Many times my only option was either back home where she wasn't being supervised or cared for well, or to the detention center, which was pretty traumatic.
The biggest challenge that we are encountering with our female offenders is placement. We do not have very many placements for the females if we or the screening committee decides that placement outside of the home is in the best need of the child.
Young lady did not run away. She called the battered women's shelter because she'd been battered by her parents. And when she went to the safe place where they told her they would pick her up and take her to the shelter, she waited for like 2 hours and nobody came. And she finally called me. So I called the shelter. I was informed that they checked with legal, and because she was under the age of 18, she could not go to their battered women's shelter.
Right. We are working on a resource booklet, one of our staff members, Mrs. Vivian Mixon, and it includes the names and telephone numbers and what kind of service the agency provides, or what kind of referrals the agency can make.
Okay.
So that when you have a victim of human trafficking, they have certain needs, then if you have this resource directory at your hand, then you can say, okay, they need shelter, so let's look in here under shelter and see what shelters are available. Let's call them and see if we can get these people at least housed for the time being, then we can start providing other services.
Now, we have filled the gap in some ways. We have gotten the program called Project Safe Place, finally, in DeKalb County. And if they cannot go home because it's not safe, a volunteer will take them to the shelter where they can stay for up to 15 days while better, more permanent solutions are being put in place for them.
We are ready to accept girls that are, like I said, between 14 and 18, those who have been abandoned. These girls do not have any other place to be. Some of them are wards of the court. Some of these girls, their families are incarcerated, and they just need a place. So we are now ready to accept these girls and to have a good place, good safe place that they can come and feel comfortable.
But with the Safe Place Project, volunteers are needed.
Right.
We need volunteers, particularly males, to be that runner, that person that when the kid goes into the Quick Trip, who's been one of the biggest supporters of this project, to go out and pick up the child.
A lot of people see me and they be like, oh, you're a beautiful woman, but on the inside I felt real ugly.
What was the turning point in your life?
Well, after I had my child, I joined the church, got saved, and I just promised never to go back to that lifestyle. And the church helped me get in college, and I've been there ever since.
And that is one of the things that our organization is desperately seeking to do, is to provide that particular, that aftercare, and to take the initiative to become a mentor or a role model to that child and remain involved in their lives for at least a year after they return home.
We have young people that are serving 10 years and more for having sex with their girlfriend or their boyfriend. When they started off doing these laws, it was intended for perverts and these old people that were preying on children. It was never intended for the Marcus Dixons of the world or for the Janalo Wilsons of the world. The lady that had the baby for the 15-year-old boy that she married is serving 3 years. Janalo Wilson having consensual sex with his partner is serving 10 years. No baby. Is serving 10 years. However, the videotape, the girl was involved just as guilty as he was. She's not doing any time.
You just mentioned that there about a 12-year-old not having the right to consent to sex. But I get a lot of calls from parents of children 14 years of age that are saying that when they make the calls and ask for help from the police departments, a lot of times they're telling them that if they go out and they find the child and the child's not willing to come home, there's nothing that they can do. What's the difference between the 12-year-old and 14-year-old? It gives them the right to have that choice.
Well, it's really a difficult thing for the police, because the police can physically bring the child away from the situation.
You know, once I make contact with them, you know, there are circumstances, but if they're a juvenile, then they don't have choice. I mean, you know, you have to stay with your parent or legal guardian. You don't have the option to stay with a family member unless the legal guardian says, okay, first I just wanted to make sure they're okay. I give them permission to do that. Other than that, they're going home to the parent or legal guardian.
But the child is so psychologically attached to somebody who she quote unquote thinks she loves. The minute you take her back home, she's back, jump out the window. I mean, we've heard the cases where she continues to go back. So what we learn is, in order to bring these young girls back from that, it takes some deep psychological, and not just, we're going to pray her better. I believe in prayer like everybody else, but she needs some clinical help to understand what's going on and the reason why, she has this affinity of this love for the guy who's absolutely exploring her.
Again, they offer them this freedom, they offer them clothes, they offer them cosmetics and various things, but it doesn't last.
Right.
Once they're there, it's, well, we've got to pay for this.
Yes.
And this is how you can pay.
And so they know how to exploit a child. They know how to take her out and buy her some shoes or buy her whatever she wants to eat, or put a $5 bracelet on her arm or a $10 necklace around her neck. And she really thinks that she's in love and this guy loves her. These cases sometimes pull families apart. Because mom has to get off job, she has a search, she's coming to clubs that she would never go to, looking for her child, and the minute she finds him, the child may have a good 2 weeks, and then take off again. What happens to many of these women, when the daughter returns, they look at it, this is not the daughter that I raised. My daughter wouldn't cuss me out. My daughter would not be on drugs. My daughter would not steal and do the thing. So they're looking at this child, this is not the child that I brought up.
We have a parents program that we have developed called the 18-year talk.
Okay.
And we named it that because talking to your children about sex is not a one-time deal. It's not the big talk. It is an 18-year conversation. Many surveys show that kids, they get their information from their peers, but they prefer to get it from their parents.
I did a conference last month down at the Loudermilk Center with about 200 teenagers. Okay. And the question I said was, I don't need you to tell me whether you're sexually active.
Right.
But did you know that you can go to jail for being there? Because these kids now won't get 10 years.
Right.
The new law is mandatory 25 years.
Many of our children who are committed to the state encounter problems in school. We are experiencing a number of commitments with behavior issues within our school system.
Yes, I was still in school. I went to school regular, but just dropping out and slacking on homework, that didn't happen.
Within Tapestry, we actually have several programs. We have a domestic violence program, sexual assault, and a program for victims of human trafficking.
Once they are reported, they're not treated as criminals, they're treated as victims.
Yes.
And then they are offered such services they can then receive our TANF services, food stamps, and other things that they were eligible for, and get a special visa, which is called a T visa. And that's a temporary visa in this country, and get their lives back together so that they will not be involved in this kind of situation again.
We have to stand up as advocates and say enough is enough, and it works. Problem is, I started something, the next person came in, their focus may have been different. So you got to be able to sustain it over time.
And I hope that the viewers that are watching will contact us, and we're looking for suggestions, and we don't have all the answers. We don't even know all the questions.
One person can make a difference, and telling the story, just by telling this story, hopefully somebody will see it and say, I want to fight a little bit harder, because there's other people out here fighting, with and for me. So keep up the work.